Hi, it's Eva here at Briva Creative. And today I'm going to be showing you my recipe for a silicone casting material that is super easy, and you can make it with ingredients that are super easy to find. You probably already have one of them in your kitchen. The other might be in your garage. So this is a super cheap and easy method that I love. I've used it several times now. It works great for casting plaster of Paris, would work great for concrete. Not sure if it would work for wax. I will have to try that and get back to you. Let me know if you're interested. But it's a great casting material for taking impressions of things. Today we're going to be taking an impression of plants. But you could take impressions of essentially any shape, and depending on how you mix together the recipe, you could get it softer to get a fairly detailed impression of pretty much anything you can think of. So get thinking while you watch this video. Alright, so here we've got pretty much everything you need. The cornstarch and then this 100% silicone that you can get at the hardware store. I am using these weeds that I've gathered from my yard and garden. You do want to make sure that you get 100% silicone caulk. That is what works. If there's other additives in there, it won't work as well, or it won't work at all. I've not tried it, but definitely get 100% silicone. So we're just going to open this up carefully, and I always use a nail or something to pop that inner seal and then get it into our caulking gun and squeeze a bunch out. I'm not using measurements for this, but just squeeze out a good amount of the caulk, the silicone, and we're going to add cornstarch to it to make sort of a Play-Doh-y consistency. So you just kind of add cornstarch until you hit that consistency that you're looking for. And you don't want to add too much, because the starch is actually what helps to speed up the silicone's hardening process. So if you add too much, you don't have very much working time. And even with just a little bit to get to the Play-Doh consistency, you need to get this kind of shaped into what you want it to be shaped as within probably 10-15 minutes, just because it does start to get firm and hard to work after that. And definitely wear gloves. It's a super messy process. It's super sticky. And I'm just using some disposable cups and a stir stick so that cleanup is easy. Definitely do this on a surface that is covered. Don't do this on a surface you care about. But you want to knead that cornstarch in until it starts to not stick to your gloves quite so much. You might need to add a little bit more cornstarch to it just to get to that point. But once it starts to get workable and it's not too sticky, go ahead and give it a couple last squeezes and get working. So just work it until it's the good consistency and feels workable, and then divide it up into whatever portions you need for your molds. I am doing these little circle guys, so this was about the shape that I wanted, and you can tell it's already starting to get stiff here on me. So I'm trying to work as fast as I can. And I had done 1 or 2 casts previous to this one here, so I was probably about at the 8-minute mark for this batch of silicone. So I'm just laying those lovely little planties in there and arranging them how I think that they will look nice. You don't want to get stuff that is too fine or too delicate, because it won't press into the silicone enough to actually make an impression and result in a final plaster casting. So you definitely want stuff that's a little chunkier. So those grass heads, I think, are going to turn out really great. And things like the blade of grass probably don't show up in the final cast at all. And you want to go ahead and press down that kind of the backing shape that you're using, and make sure that you get those edges nice and high so that you actually have enough depth to pour the plaster and not have it spill all over the place. So see, this is another batch of silicone that is a bit softer and easier to work with. and I'm just pressing up those edges once again all the way up to the edge. Feel free to go ahead and go all the way up over the edge. You can totally cut off the excess later. It's better to have a deeper cast than to have it be too shallow and useless later. So now I'm going to try using these tiles that I had laying around. You can find these at your usual hardware store, you know, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever. They're fairly easy to find, just shiny white subway tiles or squares or whatever shape you're looking for. Fairly easy to get a hold of, and you can buy them individually too, which is super great. So I am just rolling out this rectangle so that it is large enough for that tile. And of course, leave some excess so that you can wrap up the edges and give yourself edges for that cast. This one will probably turn out to be fairly shallow, and I think there's probably a way to do the edge a bit taller and thicker, but this was my first time working with these tiles, and I think it turned out all right, but I definitely prefer a slightly deeper cast so that I have more room to play with the depth of my finished piece. And again, I'm just laying out these lovely little leaf buddies that I found in my garden. It's so much fun to play with this and guess how well each different plant would show up later in the process. Ideally, you want to let this cure for 24 hours. Theoretically, this starch does speed up the process, but 24 hours is ideal to make sure that that silicone has fully cured and is as strong as it possibly can be. So you see here I'm just cutting off those extra bits that kind of folded up over the top edge of my mold here, and then gently loosen that silicone and pop out our wonderful little glass mold. These glass things are actually pickling weights, so they're for fermenting and pickling things. I actually bought them for a different project. I've wanted to try making my own pigments, and part of the process of doing that will use these things. So I will probably post a video sometime in the future when I get around to making those pigments. But you see here I'm just kind of delicately pulling out these plants. The silicone mold is fairly sturdy, so feel free to yank on the plants or whatever you need to do to get them out. I struggled with some of the more delicate bits. I couldn't find my really sharp tweezers to actually pull them out as thoroughly as I had wanted, but they came out all right. And after the first cast or two, you're going to end up pulling out any leftover plant bits with the plaster, so eventually they will work their way out of the mold. So go ahead and do a couple test shots if you have a bit of plant that just won't come out. And moving on to the tiles, these definitely didn't hold up as well. I could tell as I was pulling them off that the edges were somewhat fragile, but I think since they're so shallow, they don't actually need the strength that I was hoping for from a taller cast, so it turned out all right. I think they'll do just fine. And if there's a hole or a crack or you end up tearing your cast a little bit, that's not a big deal at all. You'll see in a moment I am patching up some of the little holes with this modeling clay. You can use modeling clay or Play-Doh, just anything squishy. Probably sticky tack would work just as well. Just stick it in the hole and it should hold pretty well. You're not putting enough plaster into these to actually create enough pressure to push any of these things out, so just pop whatever in there to plug up the hole. And now I'm just adding some metal rings just to give strength to the plaster here. This also gives me something to attach my loop of string to, so that I have some way of hanging these guys when they are all finished. So you just want to mix up a little bit of plaster at a time. Again, less is better probably, because you do have a limited time of workability with this. Just follow the instructions on your plaster to figure out the water to powder ratio on this. And then you want to tap these really good. Make sure that those liquids and that good plaster gets down in those tiny, tiny little crevices in your mold. And I pressed the metal on this down a bit far. You kind of want it to be suspended in the middle so it doesn't show through the front. You'll see in a moment where that failed me, but It's probably best to pour in half the plaster and then place the metal on top and then pour the other half so that it doesn't sink quite as far as it did when I did these. Now moving on to the tiles, I will not be adding a loop to these because I think they'll look better as coasters or just little flat things rather than hanging them. So again, I'm just adding that wire for strength. You could also probably use a piece of fabric or something in this to achieve the same strength result, and honestly that would probably be easier to suspend properly in that plaster so that it doesn't show through one side or the other. And you want to let these set for probably at least an hour. I think I let these sit for 2 or 3 before I tried to pull them out. Again, 24 hours is a full cure, but you can uncast them, unmold them after a couple of hours. Refer to instructions on whatever plaster you end up using. Or concrete, you could totally use some, well, cement. You could use a cement mix for this. I think concrete would be too chunky. And just delicately loosen that silicone and release the plaster from its confinement. I didn't have any problem with the mold sticking to the plaster at all. It came out super easy. I love this recipe for the silicone casting material. It's so easy to make and it has really great results for how incredibly cheap it is compared to some silicone mold material that you can find online. And these turned out pretty cool. Again, I'm just looking at how well some of those thicker things, the kind of sturdier seed pods and whatnot, turned out a lot better than the more delicate or fine like leaves and tendrils. They didn't quite press into the silicone as much as I had hoped, and thus didn't transfer to the plaster quite as well. But it's just a process of trial and error, and honestly all the materials involved here are fairly inexpensive, so definitely try it and experiment and find what works well for you. So if you give this a try, definitely tag us, let us know in the comments if you liked this video, what you think, your thoughts, your hate. Give us everything. Like, subscribe, comment. We love to hear from you guys, and we love doing these videos. See you next time!